Thank you. Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Television Academy to the Wolf Theater here at the Saban Media Center for Penning, Pennsylvania Avenue. Tonight's discussion on how television tries to recreate the Oval Office. I think it's a bit of a maxim that great storytelling depends on stakes. Often the greater the stakes, the greater the drama, or the greater the comedy. And it doesn't really matter which administration or party is in office at the time. The business of government and the stories around that business are nothing if not high stakes. The things that happen in Washington can impact the lives of everyone, not just in this country, but across the globe. So it's really no wonder that television that tries to peek inside the West Wing to tell us stories around the seat of power and the results of its actions is just so compelling. Well, tonight we are going to hear from some of the people who help us just a little bit tear away from the 24-hour news cycle to spin up those stories. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our panelists for the evening, Michelle King, David Mandel, Tommy Schlamme, Barbara Hall, and Bradley Whitford. Round of applause, great. And of course, a huge, huge thanks to our moderator for tonight. He currently portrays Seth Wright, the White House press secretary on Designated Survivor, and as a former White House staffer, he has an insider's knowledge into the operations of government at the highest level. Please welcome Kal Penn.
Thanks, Maury. Thank you. I appreciate it. How are you guys? Thank you for having me. Maury is correct. When they called me, asked if I would help moderate this, they said, obviously, because you worked for a real administration and now play a press secretary. I have way more responsibility as a fictional White House aide than I did for the real one, which is why I'm really excited to talk to some of our favorite showrunners and cast members from political dramas that I enjoy. You might recognize the set behind me. This is all from The West Wing. I thought that was pretty cool. Apparently it's been in storage at a Warner Brothers warehouse, so we thank them very much. When I found out it was from storage, I immediately thought of every producer who said that they promised that I could take the outfit I was wearing as soon as it went to the warehouse. Now I know it exists, that they actually keep the stuff in a warehouse, and you've all been lying to us the whole time. I'm going to sit behind this desk and introduce our panelists and then just dive right in. Each of them will have a chance to introduce a clip, and we've got 5 sections on everything from civics to politics, to how political campaigns work, to national security, to obviously how to build characters and create these fictional worlds around things that everybody loves. So let me first introduce from The West Wing, executive producer Tommy Schlamme. Also from The West Wing, actor Bradley Whitford. Executive producer and showrunner from Veep, David Mandel. Woo! The creator and showrunner of Madam Secretary and co-executive producer of Homeland, Barbara Hall. Woo! And we were supposed to have both Kings with us. Robert King has the flu. His doctor didn't let him, I think, fly from the East Coast. He should have gone to Dr. Showin, who does,
the fixer.
Does all the cast physicals, which basically means, yeah, your form looks fine. You're fine, honey. You're totally fine to shoot this movie. So Dr. Show next time. But we do have his better half, Michelle King, creator of The Good Wife, The Good Fight, and Brain Dead. So thank you all for being here. They want to see your clips and hear you talk more than me. So I'm going to kick it over to you guys. We have a clip that's going to talk about the topic of campaigning. Do you want to set it up for us?
So this is actually the end of the 2-part season opener in season 3. And it was when President Bartlett was running for re-election, and he had brought in some other people to sort of help in the campaign because there had obviously been some problems with the information that he had MS. And so there's an enormous amount of friction between the original group, Bradley and his friends, and the new group that's come in. And this is the very end of the show. It's a campaign event. They're also worried that CJ is about to quit, and the president comes in to sort of bring everybody back together again, especially the original people that he had won the first campaign with. And that's this.
Victim to torpor and timidity. Torpor is not a word a lot of people know.
It means apathy.
And dullness.
I know what it means.
Doug means...
They know what I mean.
Hi.
He spent 6 years in Congress.
If they don't know what the word means...
What's the word?
Torpor.
It means apathy.
And dullness.
I know what the word means. I'm saying if people don't know what the word means...
They can look it up.
Good morning, Mr. President.
It's not our job to appeal to the lowest common denominator, Doug. It's our job to raise it. If you're going to be the education president, it'd be nice not to hide that you have an education. Bruno, would you mind?
Of being elected governor of his home state.
Churchill and FDR. Serious men using big words for big purpose. It occurs to me, I never said I'm sorry. I am. For the lawyers, for the press, for the mess, for the fear. Bruno, Doug, Connie, these guys are good. They want to win, so do we. The only thing we want more is to be right. I wonder if you can't do both. There's a new book, and we're gonna write it. You can win if you run a smart, disciplined campaign. If you studiously say nothing, nothing that causes you trouble, nothing that's a gaffe, nothing that shows you might think the wrong thing, nothing that shows you think. But it just isn't worthy of us, is it, Toby?
No, sir.
It isn't worthy of us, it isn't worthy of America, it isn't worthy of a great nation. We're gonna write a new book, right here, right now, this very moment today.
So, my friend,
Sir?
it is my pleasure and my great fortune to introduce my husband, our friend, New Hampshire's greatest son, and the President of the United States, Josiah Bartlett.
You know what? Break's over.
You know, when you hear Bartlett talking like that and you think about what's happening today, you realize what a profound effect we had on public.
Is it okay? Dave? I was going to say, is it okay if we just sit here and cry for like the segment?
Actually, we were backstage.
Like 9 minutes.
We were backstage watching this, and Dave went, "Did you shoot that in the 1800s?"
Well, all of that is actually the premise of the question that I had, which is similar to asking a real-life politician. How do you guys decide when to be aspirational and when to be calculating, particularly with regard to some of the campaign plot lines?
Well, look, I think this show was aspirational. I mean, I think there wasn't any other political shows on at that time. It was, there was a Clinton fatigue at the moment. I think clearly Aaron and, you know, I'm first-generation immigrant. I just felt like we both were patriots. So it would seem like, wouldn't it be great to do a Valentine's to public service? And that really was the goal. So it wasn't like we were trying to go to, you look at it now and it's like, pull some of that music back a little bit, Jesus Christ. But it was because we were so clearly, and by the way, if somebody could figure out how to do it, aspirational is not bad right now, do you know? It's that we are beaten so much up again about the concept of government. And, I think it really, sort of the premise in the show a little bit also was, Reagan said, government's not the problem. Government's not the solution, government's the problem. And we so didn't believe that. We so believed that government could actually affect change. So that was us. But, the world grew up a little bit.
It was interesting in the course of the show. It really was a response. It was almost a criticism of Clinton and a sense of a sort of moral degradation of the audience that Aaron was writing towards. Then Bush happened, then 9/11 happened, then we were, the only upright Democrats were fictional and they were us, and the show became, it kind of changed. It became a sort of response to that in a certain way. So events really affected what the show was talking about, but it remained aspirational.
What have your experiences been? Same sort of thing, aspirational.
We're sort of the opposite because we, as I always point out, Armando Iannucci created the show and then I took it over. So the show has always been, the show I was a fan of before I ever worked there, was really sort of kind of almost, dare I say, in a response to the West Wing of almost going, and again, these are my words, not his, but almost sort of like, that's not what these guys are really like. This is what they're really like. This is what politics is really like. And he created this wonderful world that we tried to kind of keep up where you sort of see what the real kind of quest for power is like. However, I guess what's aspirational about us has always been that in the Selina Meyer world, if you will, there are consequences, that she pays the price for sort of having, sort of like saying the wrong thing, tweeting the wrong thing, making a gaffe, and actually suffers. She does not get what she wants. And so that now seems aspirational, even though that is not how it was laid out originally. But now that sounds like a very wonderful world we could aspire to. So yeah.
A little checks and balances shout out. Yeah. Barbara and Michelle?
Our show is aspirational because the mission statement behind it when I created was that it was a place where everybody could come to talk about politics that wasn't so polarized and polarizing. And that was 3 years ago. And so, because our show is about foreign policy, we had a little more leeway to do that. And it's about diplomacy, it's about the State Department. And, and so we never identified a party on our show. And so people were able to listen to the issues. And then eventually we made him a third-party candidate, we made him an independent. But because everybody came to the party and listened to all the issues and joined into them and felt invited to all of it, and it's really, our show is about process. It's about problem solving and it's about policy. And people are able to pay attention to that because they don't feel, they're not identified as being divided or not invited. So that aspect of it is very aspirational. We're just showing you government as it could work and as it should work. So.
Michelle?
Yeah, no, our show, I would say tonally, we're following the characters. That we've got a cynical bunch of attorneys at the center of our show. So they're just not aspirational by nature. So as a result, the show isn't. But many of these characters started on The Good Wife before migrating over to The Good Fight. And so they've been going for 9 years. And so there's been this incredible shift, obviously with the latest election. And so we see their points of view about what's going on. And horror. I mean, it's left-wing Chicago, and we're just playing it true.
Have you, I know you guys dove pretty deep into Iowa caucuses and things like that over the years. Has anyone not tackled campaign politics, and is there a reason for that?
We did.
You did, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You did with the husband, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, we
You guys
had,
did like actual caucuses.
yeah, ratings smash.
That was my follow-up, which was, in terms of the campaign plot lines, you know, aspirational versus cynical obviously is broad, but are there things that when you're testing it, or networks giving you notes saying, yes, it's okay to do this, but not this far? Or do you seem to have a fair amount of leeway with that?
I know we were, in that, this period of time, we weren't hiding the idea, we were relitigating the Bush-Gore campaign completely. I mean, that was what Gore should have done and should have done against Bush, and shouldn't have, you know, that was completely, we cast, you know, James Brolin as the opposition, who seemed to be pretty vacant. So it was about the least subtle thing that we were doing, so it was clearly that, and there was never a pushback from the studio or the network about that.
We're actually, I mean, the show previously has seen her running a little bit, and then the president stepped down, so then she became president. And where we ended our previous season and where we will pick up is her unable to sort of live a civilian life and thinking about running again. And obviously we're delayed, but we're going to basically be picking it up in Iowa with a hope of really, you know, Trump doesn't exist in our world, we don't do Trump, but really trying to talk about, I think, how Iowa has completely changed now, and that, you know, come 2020, it's going to be a very different campaign process because of him. I'm not saying someone's going to do exactly what he did in the same way he did it, but I do think the sort of the way you're going to campaign, we are going to see changes to that. And so we're playing around with a lot of those, or I guess we're on hiatus right now. We were playing around with a lot of those ideas in terms of the future. But no network, they're very supportive of everything like that.
Same here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's shocking that CBS lets us keep moving forward with this stuff. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Well, Dave, then, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this could come up later. One thing that is incredible to me is there was a real fear when West Wing started, like, oh, like, you're going to have like a fake politician, like, you know, political shows don't work. And I look around now, and there's just, like, everybody's trying to do a political show, which
I get that, but although it's a little bit, that's just networks. Like, you're going to have an apartment full of Jews, you know, it's sort of like, right, yeah. I mean, it's like.
Right, oh, that worked. Yeah.
I think also for us, it was a situation where we clearly wanted to say what their political affiliation was. That was actually because, having worked with many people who were policy wonks, that's all they talk about. You know, so to sort of strip them of that, I think the luxury now is you can actually do a show where you don't have to point an arrow to that one way or the other, because we become so sophisticated by just wanting to listen to policy and how people make laws or do foreign policy. But it was a very clear, and you know, everybody went, you're going to alienate 50% of your audience. And we went, yeah, but we get 50%. You know,
but I do think, and I mean,
and it didn't do that at all.
Not to bring it on home, but I do think a lot of these shows, in some ways, just the West Wing has to exist for these other shows to exist afterwards.
Very much.
You know what I mean? It's like,
yes,
it's true. It's just honestly true.
So you could make fun of us.
A little bit. Yeah.
Speaking of making fun of things, David, I saw this clip and laughed my ass
This is
off.
hardcore politics.
Can you set it up? Well, and just so you guys know, this clip is, we were going to focus on presidential staff and advisors and sort of that world.
We sort of, again, in the non-aspirational way, we don't have Josh, we don't have Toby, we have Mike, we have Amy, we have Ben and Kent, and it's not quite clear why she hasn't fired them. I guess that's the one very unrealistic thing about the show. They all probably should have been fired many times over, although I like to think now in sort of a Trump way, maybe it's that she knows no one would come and work at the White House. So this is sort of our version of staff. This is from season 5, which was the first season I was taking over the show. This is from the 8th episode, 7th or 8th episode. It's called Congressional Ball. And just to set the tone, there had been a tie, an electoral college tie on the evening of the election, and the election was going to be thrown into the Congress. And so this is talking about basically lining up those votes for an election that was going to happen to decide who was going to be president. And it's everybody plotting and her having to really depend on this staff. And so this is our take on staff.
Madam President.
Hello, gentlemen.
Children.
All right, let's get to this. Let's make it quick. Roger, you want to walk us through the drill right now? And would you please try and keep it clean?
Madam President, tomorrow night is the President's annual holiday party for congressional members and their families. Ma'am, you'll need to make the initial approach. Ben will keep the offers straight. Kent will keep a running tally. Tom, you'll be in charge of putting out any fires. And once you're all done with them, I'll move in and squirt a half-gallon of ropey jism into their modeled congressional cornholes.
Oh, you made it so far, and then you just... Tom, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Nope. Roger took my thing about ropey jism.
Right.
Thank you, Madam President.
And I will see you tomorrow night, right, Tom?
Indeed, yes.
Okay. Dirty. Just dirty and shady. Door. So? What the fuck is Tom up to? Why was he meeting with Purcell at a Korean barbecue place?
You know, Marwood is the opposition.
You think Tom is helping O'Brien?
But what could O'Brien offer him that's better than the vice presidency?
Literally anything. Oh, Tom wanted Secretary of the Treasury. I said no. Ah, fuck.
Ma'am, you just have to keep nailing down those votes, all right? 26 votes and it's over.
Okay, guys, we gotta keep an eye on Tom tomorrow night, really.
Yeah. Yes?
I was just checking to see if there was another meeting about me.
Not today.
So this clip obviously focuses on crisis management, but
yes, but I mean, these are the people you have to depend on. This is your staff. And look, there's a lot. Obviously, I guess anyone who's ever spent any time in D.C., they're probably 1,000 times older than an actual presidential staff probably would be. These days, it seems like everybody's like 24, basically, in a White House. But you get those archetypes. You sort of get, you have sort of Kent as kind of the technocrat. You have Ben as kind of the grizzled old party hand that's sort of seen too many battles. Amy kind of, that's sort of the sort of this is what I should be doing kind of the quest. So you get these types. And I do think it's very representative of staff. So I guess why the clip was chosen. Yeah.
How do you balance the human elements of staff working together with the power dynamic of all of you have principals in this world, a president or a secretary or a head that will always assume a role of power even if they're shooting the shit with their peers, right? So how do you balance that?
It's interesting. These are such strong characters that, I don't know, a little bit, and it sounds silly, but on the page, they fight for their own time. Over the years, we've developed these like little side relationships so that certain characters are closer to others and certain ones clearly respect each other more. And so these little fiefdoms kind of arise, and and that carries through even into just the actual production of the show, where we'll be sitting there blocking a scene and thinking to ourselves, this is weird, they should be sitting near each other. And maybe even if we don't have it in the script that they can lean over to each other, we'll get there as we're sort of putting it on its feet. So a lot of it is, ends up just being very character driven. And we kind of go back to how would these people react to this situation? That's what you're always thinking about.
Barbara, is that different at all in a world where you've built a third party and don't have to deal with some of the pressures of what you see in the newspaper?
No, not really, because we have a third party, which in and of itself is an aspirational aspect of the show. But, you know, all the politics are still representative conservative views, liberal views, moderate views. You just don't know where they're coming from necessarily. And that's what's interesting about our show. And people can hear a political position and not really be too clear whether it's conservative or liberal or moderate, you know. And so that's, you know, but we're still presenting different sides and different points of view. And so, you know, it's a little bit the same. Yeah.
Just to throw one thing in, I think, and maybe this is a big difference, is we also don't necessarily ever mention party, but at the same time, there's very much so, these characters want these jobs, and they're not particularly interested in what the bill is doing, as long as the bill passes and the bill will get their guy more votes. And so it's not necessarily, I think, even that they think Selena is the best president. It's just if she is not president, they will lose their jobs.
Oh, interesting.
And I think very much, you know, in DC, those people do very much exist. They've always existed, which is they're there for, they're working for this person, and then 5 minutes later they're working for that person. Because for them, it's really about their own end game and not any policy or whatever. And you saw guys like that, you know, even Clinton back in the day would, you know, oh, now Dick Morris, you know, he would have he moved himself more center, then went a little more liberal. So, you know, I think it's very much about, again, just trying to get power and hold on to it, which I think, you know, sort of betrays any sort of party sort of loyalty or anything like that.
I used to get defensive about this because people, you know, the West Wing would be dismissed. The Sopranos was on, and, you know, they were like real, you know, legit. And, you know, we were this like sentimental, you know, sort of schlocky thing. And I would always say, I actually, yes, obviously it's fantasy, but I do think there are 5 or 6 people around Obama who actually totally believed in his mission. And I got in trouble once saying, you want to know what a fantasy is? It's a hitman in therapy, which you should not say in public. But it's an interesting thing, and I think there's both. I mean, you were in the White House. Did they believe in that guy?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But in talking to folks who have worked for different administrations through the years, or just in general in politics, I think I'm obviously biased, but I think that 8 years was something that was probably a little more wear your heart on your sleeve than some of the calculations that we've heard that happened on the Hill or in previous.
That's why you guys got through all those scandals.
So many of them.
Yes, it was horrible.
Yeah, it was like a new one every day.
But I would bet, I mean, again, I wasn't there, but I'm assuming, perhaps not in the Oval itself, but, you know, as you made your way over to like the EOB or something, there had to have been people that you guys didn't like. You know, like somebody working for Biden, where you're like, that guy's an asshole. Like,
I think I just that wasn't a Biden specific.
No, Tony Blinken.
Tony is great. But I know you know that. No, I think in our case it was most of us were outsiders both to the Democratic Party. I mean, I'm still an independent, and a lot of folks who it was never their career goal to work in the White House. Otherwise, you would have gone to work for Hillary Clinton or John Edwards in Iowa. And so I think by the time we got there, it was very much we were the outsiders even within the Democratic Party. But you're right, that doesn't mean that you get along with everybody.
I guess,
you still have beef with other people,
that was my only
folks at agencies. But I think that's what's so interesting to me. I remember when House of Cards came out, and I was watching it going, this would never happen in our hopey, changey world. And then talking to other folks going, you've never
And
had
now it's aspirational.
Right, now that's very aspirational, yeah.
So I think what you said is really interesting, which is about climbing. You have characters who are climbing that ladder because they are jobs, just like any other jobs.
I do think that was, if there was something missing in our show, I don't mean to be critical because I'm so grateful.
Sure.
You know, was the positioning.
I thought it was going to be the casting of Josh.
The casting of Josh.
Who did he go to network against?
No one. But Richard Schiff went to network against Eugene Levy.
Oh, wow.
Really? Wow.
And Allison Janney?
CC Pounder.
Right.
Wow.
Yep. So.
Got weird.
Eugene, let me say that again. Eugene Levy.
It's a different show. No, but you know, I always felt like there would be more sort of careerist maneuvering, just in terms of.
Well, it was sort of why we brought in Ron Silver, and that group that came in there were specifically Dick Morse.
Right.
That was that sort of story.
Right, and they were
But
brought in as the bad guys, but you know, when you read like, and again, you read like, you know, Shattered, just from day one, we're all on the same team here. She leaves the room and they want to kill each other. You know, it just was.
But the other thing is, with our show, there was also this concept that there was a castle, and there were a bunch of people stuck in the castle, and they had a moat around it, and people were trying to get in, so that they were the family. That's why we didn't go out too often. We stayed there. But it became this family, and like any other family, it was dysfunctional at times, but very mildly dysfunctional compared to what Dave does. Which is closer to a family I recognize.
Michelle, do you find that to be the case also in your world? Like, what percentage is?
Well, our world is a law firm, so
Yeah.
it's a different kind of business. But what's been interesting for us is oftentimes our lead characters are not the most powerful people in the room, and you constantly have to work against the impulse to put the star at the center of things. When in fact, it's like, no, she wouldn't be sitting at the head of the table. She's going to be in the second row, and she's not going to have the most lines, because if we're true to the power dynamic, we have to honor that.
That's fascinating.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, as an actor, what was the dynamic between your character and Bartlett? And did you feel like that was seamless?
I felt like part of the thing that made the show successful in its aspirational tone was a real. It was the casting of Martin, who I think we all personally and professionally felt a kind of paternal want to protect him, and we loved him, and we weren't faking that, and he was a tremendously kind, decent soul, and I felt like that dynamic helped us, you know, in this kind of aspirational world. I
It was actually, speaking of that, and as an actor, the hardest that I had to work with Martin ever on any show was the show called Noel, which was a show in which Brad's character explodes at the president. And every instinct in Martin was to comfort him.
Right.
You know? And the whole point is, you're not comforting this guy at all. He has overstepped his boundaries. He should never do this, and you've got to let him know, just by looking at him, that he has made a massive mistake.
Yeah, and he couldn't do it. He kept, every time I got
it
upset,
was so hard
he'd
for him.
like reach out.
And by the way, I had to then, this is a little thing, I had to show him, I never told you this, a clip of him on Larry King 30 years earlier, where he was a tortured soul. Really smoking cigarettes and really a completely different human being. This is a man who went through Reformation. He truly did. And I said, I'm sorry, you have to look at this. That you were scary on that show. You're really scary. Larry King was scared of you. You're scary. You have to access some part of that guy again to sort of play this guy.
And that's why he was smoking.
We're going to move on to policy. And in particular, now that I know all of these things about calculation and aspiration, I'm really curious to ask you the next series of questions. The clip is from my show, Designated Survivor. It talks about a little bit about guns and a little bit about immigration, so take a look. Yes, we're concerned that Mexico's voided the pact, but we've made solid progress toward a new agreement. And with labor's backing, the U.S. has been able to lower tariffs on select Mexican goods, and the Mexican government has responded positively.
Do you expect the Mexican position to change now that we know the bullet that killed Mr. Menez came from an American gun?
I don't, the only information I have is that Mr. Menez was hit multiple times.
The ME has just confirmed the kill shot was an American one based on the angle of entry.
Okay, I mean, even if that's true, the truckers have a self-defense claim.
Mr. Menez was driving on the side of the road.
Okay, well, they may have had every reason to suspect that he was going to swerve. And if that's true, then they had every right to stand their ground.
Will the shooting be investigated?
Sounds like that's a question for local authorities.
Is the president going to condemn American gun violence?
I'm sorry, guys. I can sidebar on that with you later.
So is this shooting a referendum on American gun violence?
No, it's a referendum on the dangers of running the border at 90 miles an hour.
Mr. Short, do you have a position on this?
No, I do not, but the administration does, which is that this sad situation reinforces the need for the parties to get back to the table.
But as the only Mexican-American on the president's senior staff...
I don't serve the president as a Mexican-American.
What do you serve him as?
As a national security advisor.
No te escondas, güey.
No me estoy escondiendo.
Blanco o negro, el perro es siempre un perro.
Y un güey es siempre un güey.
So, this clip I love because it's clear that the staff was relatively ill-prepared to dive into gun violence. It was clear, I think, from the questions we're getting that it's not something that our boss wanted to delve into, and yet we're being forced to talk about it. I'm never in the writer's room. I consult on my show, but we film in Toronto and our writers are based in LA, so I rarely get to ask questions like this. Just sort of like, how do you all decide which topics to cover in terms of policy, how deep to go, whether they're perceived as controversial, whether you address them in this manner where all of the characters are sort of staying away from it because they don't want to get in the midst of something controversial. And I'm particularly curious because you each come from such different worlds, you know, both in terms of the worldview and in terms of just the simple, you know, Veep being as comedic as it can be and diving in. How do you each sort of approach that, if you want to?
What policies to get into?
Yeah, just broadly, how do you decide which policies? How do you explore those storylines? Is there ever a push and pull of no, this is too much or this is too far?
Well, of course, we do almost exclusively foreign policy, and we also, our show originally was set about one election cycle and 1 year in the future. So our approach in the beginning was to take something that was sort of in the atmosphere, sort of in the global conversation, and then game that out a few years to see what that would look like. And one example of that was the Iran peace agreement, which was just starting to be talked about when we did our show. And so we just gamed it out and went ahead and did it. And then a year later, John Kerry stole our idea and had the peace agreement. So, that's how we did it. Certainly in the beginning, was we would just take things that were sort of being talked about a little bit, just the beginning, and then try to game that out. And so that's how we approach it generally.
Michelle?
Yeah. All our writers read and watch the news obsessively, and so current events are always the topic. And if we're fighting amongst ourselves, that's when we know we have a show.
Happen a lot?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Would you all agree with that? Does that happen in the writer's room?
Oh, and by the way, I should say, it's a very polite group. So, I mean, it's when it's fighting, it remains on topic.
Okay.
I actually, there's a couple of quick points. Our show was on in a different time. How many people were watching at the peak? Like, it was like 19 million or something.
21 million.
21 million people, which is insane now.
Yeah.
But we were shooting in DC, and it was the first time I'd been like on a TV show that had gone well, and there was these people lined up, and I thought they wanted autograph, and they were lobbyists who wanted to get their issues on the show. And I realized, oh, that really makes sense, because we could get all the talking points on either side of the decennial census out. You know, computer modeling versus an actual census. This is an issue nobody, cares about. But if you got Rob Lowe laid in the course of that episode, so there was this like weird power to that.
Did you ever take them up?
Get laid? No. Did what?
Did your writers ever?
No, I don't think we threw the lot. I mean, I can tell you this, and this is speaking for Aaron, really. He was just, if I can find a story. If I can find the story, the policy, I mean, we knew a broad range of what this Democratic administration would be interested in. But I was, for instance, I was a lobbyist sometimes, you know. I'm not a professional lobbyist. With him, I would be a lobbyist because I was passionate about the death penalty and about, you know, against the death penalty. And he knew that, and I was always just coming, we should do something about the death penalty. We should do something. What's the fucking story? I don't know what to do about the death penalty right now. And then I found out that you couldn't kill people on the Sabbath, that we had this thing that you don't execute people on the Sabbath. And I told him that, and that became in other words, now I know what I can write about. I can write about that thing, and how people relate to that in their own personal lives and how this Catholic president has to deal with that. But so we would, you know, personally pitch. I don't think there were lobbyists coming through our doors.
No, sure,
pitching,
okay.
You know.
Were there times where you had to decide, you know, well, how do you decide between something like gun control or foreign policy? Is that even a conversation? If there's an episode where you've got to pick something, is the more heated, more polarizing topic always the one that's the better story, or?
Gun control's funnier. No, I'm kidding.
Sorry. I mean, honestly, and this is going to sound silly, on our show, the issues are kind of the chuffa, the lettuce, sort of writer's room terms, in the sense of, you know, our characters are always constantly talking over each other. And so what makes it feel very real is that when someone is sort of vaguely droning on about any bill, about any issue, while she's being persnickety with Gary and not really listening, and then occasionally, you know, I guess for lack of a better word, cracking wise. So it's sort of like, in some ways, there's like an issue in every scene, and in some ways, it doesn't really matter what those issues are. Now, obviously, that's different than story for us. Obviously, we're always looking for a good story, a funny story, whatever. We love getting her to go one way on an issue and then have to change her mind. And, you know, again, that's obviously the building blocks of comedy. But for us, you know, we're constantly, especially in sort of our beginning of the writing phase, our writer's room is almost like a daily seminar where we're constantly just bringing in, you know, elected officials, former staffers, you know, reporters and stuff, and just talking to them about things, just sometimes throwing what ifs at them, picking up little pieces of gossip and just kind of making notes on all of these things. And what we love, and it's hard, I can't say to you we plan it out, is we were looking, like this is the example. Last year we were looking for an issue. We had this idea that Jonah would, as a congressman, would sort of rise to power in sort of his own idiotic version of a Tea Party. And so what would be that issue, basically? And he got discombobulated by changing his clock forward for daylight savings and got angry and sort of exploded on it in front of a reporter. And that started a movement accidentally. So that's, you know, pretty silly and funny and whatever, and, you know, you can see why that would be a good one. But we talked about a lot of things. We talked about how one of Reagan's big issues, I think, was, I can't remember now, the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, those sort of like little micro issues, like that become these bigger things. That was Dick Morris's thing too. He was with Clinton, like trying to find these little, like, you know, school lunches, these little issues that you can kind of almost like do mailings on and become these wedge issues, basically they call them. So we kind of were looking for something silly. We were playing with, I remember talking about motorcycle helmet laws, trying to find the funny thing about that, maybe Jonah not wearing his helmet. I mean, again, you can see where this stuff would have gone. And we landed on this clock thing, the daylight savings time thing, and that became the issue. And then we had, you know, and that spun out into a whole bunch of fun issues about what were they going to name their little group and trying to come up with funny names and stuff. Anyway, cut to the thing starts, you know, we're getting closer to the airing and it airs. And all of a sudden, in like Massachusetts and I think one or two other states, there are issues on the ballot for people that want to end daylight savings time. And now, because it's an issue, people are writing these editorials about how You can't have the country on 8 different time zones. This will be a problem for air. And all of a sudden, this what seems like the stupidest thing in the world, there's like real thought and real people talking about it, real talking heads talking about it. And I don't know, we look like geniuses because it seems like we planned it, but we didn't, except for the fact, as you know, you sort of used the phrase, it was in the air. That came out of just some of those people kind of coming into our office and us asking them about wedge issues, and someone brought it up at some point. So, you know, a little of it's luck sometimes, but that's when it's great. Anyway.
What about in the law firm world?
I was going to say, we sort of try to stay away from anything too issue-y. I mean, we definitely, or rather, we try to stay away from anything that might go preachy. But, you know, we're always looking for a story. I mean, I have to confess, we actually pitched CBS that we were going to do a whole season on tort reform. And they so politely on the phone said, okay, if you really want to, but maybe you want to think about that? So, I mean, we do fall back into, okay, yeah, but what's actually interesting?
So,
Can I pitch you a story?
Anything.
I'm really serious. This happened to a friend of mine. This is going to take 30 seconds.
Yeah, go
Ready?
ahead.
Yeah.
A guy I know was going up for a job. And he is, I guess, what do we say now? He identifies as heterosexual. He went up for a job and he listed somebody as a reference. And they called his reference, who was his roommate. And I believe in the course of the conversation, there was confusion. And I believe that the workplace, and this happened a few years ago, the workplace, I think, interpreted his roommate as his partner. He then did not get the job. But he did not get the job for being a possibly gay discrimination, even though he is a heterosexual. You did something like it?
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of episodes.
Over 150 episodes.
All right,
I
I tried.
them all. Yeah.
All right, good night. Thank you, everyone. And by the way,
That's what a writer's room's like.
I was going to give you that for free.
I loved it, though. I loved that episode.
Barbara, you're I don't even know how to segue. That was so
Okay.
Show clip.
I guess that's you can take credit now for things that have already even aired.
Yes,
Not just stuff
it works
that you've aired.
backwards and
Yeah.
forwards.
Barbara, your clip from Madam Secretary talks about civic engagement. Do you want to set it up for us?
Yeah, so this episode begins with our aspirational president, Conrad Dalton, behaving in a very unusual way, and the people around him becoming concerned about that. There's a perceived sonic attack on the Bulgarian embassy, and he overreacts by wanting to shoot the Russian satellite system out. And because he blames it on the Russians, because in our world, Russia is an adversary. And so he,
Again, aspirational.
and so he blames the Russians, and even after it's proven that this was most likely an accident, he still wants to go ahead and shoot the satellite system out. So Russell Jackson, the chief of staff, calls this emergency cabinet meeting with all the cabinet members to discuss where to go from here. So.
Okay. We all know why we're here. Conrad Dalton is the finest public servant I've ever known. He's thoughtful, compassionate, courageous, the best damn listener in a town full of people who love to hear themselves talk. In short, he's a good man and a patriot. And I, like many of you in this room, owe my career to him. But the man who publicly threatened to unleash the overwhelming force of America's military might and stands by his order to strike Russia's satellites despite conclusive evidence that the Russians did not attack us. It's not the same man. Something's wrong. Without a diagnosis, we don't know what. But I think that Conrad Dalton, we all know, would want us to stop him. I've talked to White House counsel and the Attorney General, and though there is a fog of law surrounding Section 4 of the 25th Amendment because it's never been invoked, They assured me that if the heads of the executive departments plus the vice president vote by simple majority, the president will be removed from office, and Vice President Hearst will become the acting president. Acting secretaries can't vote, so that eliminates Bob here, leaving 15 of you, including the VP. If ever there were a time to set aside politics and do what's best for the country, this is it.
Russell has asked me to provide some context for this. In 2 hours, President Dalton will enter the Situation Room, and I will execute his order. 9 minutes later, all 5 Russian Okhotsk satellites will be destroyed, and we will be on a war footing. Unless you alter history here tonight.
So, tackling the 25th Amendment through this particular plotline, how do you do research on that since it hasn't been invoked, and do you sort of view the role for civics in general through your show as an opportunity to educate the audience, or do you distance yourself from that as being sort of the role of why you're talking about certain issues?
We absolutely do take that on as something that we are able to do. Of course, obviously you have to do it in a way that's interesting and entertaining, dramatic. But, you know, I think that people are interested in policy and in procedure and civics. So we find a way to do that. And the way this episode came about, again, in the very, you know, quite a while ago, there were, you know, it was in the air, the discussion of the 25th Amendment, very quietly, but just what is it and how does it work? And so that was months before it aired in January. I would say around November is when we first started planning it. And then again, we gamed it out, and we had to do the research about how it works, because there is a fog of law around the 25th Amendment. There's a lot of room for interpretation. So we have a consulting group that we talk with, and we just decided to create I mean, there are several ways to interpret how to proceed, and this is one of them, which is that the cabinet members all vote and invoke Article 4. And so, you know, we just thought it would be an interesting thing to teach the world about. This is what the 25th Amendment is. This is how it works. These are some different interpretations of it. And then it just so happens that the week that it aired was the week that Michael Wolff's book came out, Fire and Fury. Nice. And it really was everywhere. And I did some interviews with, you know, some publications at the time who just would not believe that we hadn't planned it that way. All the interviews were just sort of justifying, basically explaining how television shows work. It's like we had to break this months ago and then film it and everything. And so that was one of those examples of where we tried to game something out, and then it just ran right up against something that was very much in the global discussion. So, but yeah, again, when we decided to do this, we really wanted to do it, you know, it's really about the 25th Amendment and explaining how it works, and we were able to create on our own show the kind of situation that would call for it, and how serious it is, and you know, just the different, you know, points of view, and how, you know, obviously the pros and cons of it, and how people might be likely to, you know, how they might be likely to vote, because it's never been invoked before, and just the seriousness of it. So that was what we did with that.
Do you all feel the same way? Are there civics lessons that were purposely built into certain episodes, or did they just sort of evolve organically?
Well, we're doing actually an impeachment episode right now that the law firm...
I'm sensing a theme.
Yeah, the law firm is hired by the Democratic Party to very quietly talk about how would we go about this if we win in the midterms. And we weren't hoping to give a civics lesson, but in breaking the episode are realizing this is very confusing and people might not understand it. So we're just actually stopping the show in the middle and having an animated song explaining what it is.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
It's like passing the bill, that thing.
Yeah, no, it's very much that Schoolhouse Rock thing. Yeah. They're letting us do anything.
Wow.
You know, we did it another time with Air Force One Goes Missing. And when we first started doing the research about that, we were told it can't happen, you know, and well, why? They explained why. And then they said it's like a 2% chance that could happen. I was like, let's go with that. That's narrowing on that. And again, just to explain, to show the line of succession if the president is missing. And we did it in a way that's dramatic and interesting so we can sort of explain it to people, which it is interesting, and not everyone knows it. Not everybody knows what the procedure would be. But we try to take something like that and put it around some big event, some, you know, impossible event like Air Force One Goes Missing. So.
You know, we did a 25th Amendment also, you know, which was the end of the 4th season. And it was invoked, and we literally had the president step down. But that was we wanted to do that, but that was an episode completely about the loyalty of the president's staff and the pain that they would feel for him that his daughter had been kidnapped and what that felt like as a father. So it was really about the issue of being a father and being president of the United States and how do I make a sound judgment if I know. So he himself wants to step down. He's the one who says you need to invoke the 25th Amendment and move forward.
What a fantasy.
It's funny though, you know, with some of the stuff we've done, you know, like that thing about the Electoral College tie and whatnot, you know, again, we're bringing in people. We have, you know, our show has advisors. I'm sure all your guys' shows have. You know, we have like Norm Ornstein from the American Enterprise Institute, who's, you know, written extensively on voting and voting regulations and all this kind of stuff. Guys who, Jeremy Bash, who was a lawyer on the ground during the Florida recount. So like real specialists. And you know, on the one hand, you know, we don't set out to, as you said, we don't set out to, we're going to teach, this will be so exciting, but you do have to, and you try and take advantage of it. So we sort of made it a point that, like, our character, Mike, even to the bitter end, still doesn't understand how it happened. So he gets to constantly just sort of go, so then they vote, and it's like, no! So at least it's the information is delivered in a comedy manner. But the funny thing was, so the episode airs, and then, you know, you start getting like, not a huge amount, but all of a sudden, like, political science students, like, are tweeting at me, no, they would re-vote. And then I'm like, well, no, according to the, you know, whatever, the speaker would have to call the vote, but and so now I'm in this discussion of this thing that has never happened, probably would never happen in theory, but I'm getting into like real minutia arguing with some political science major, and that's not what you were expecting, but it's great, yeah.
So I'm also learning that you actually respond to tweets.
Only those.
Only those ones.
Yeah.
How else do you tackle accuracy? How do you? I assume everybody has consultants and folks you check with, but are they in the room every day? Are there ways?
No. I mean, for us, like I said, we bring in lots of guests, like constantly, really interesting ones. This year we had a couple of the Pod Save America guys. We had John Dean in. So we're just always we bring in people from both sides of the aisle. Mitt Romney came by the office, so we're lucky that way. We have a whole bunch of people on sort of the consultants that we can reach out to at any given time. And then at some point, when there's some kind of a draft, we will send the draft and get them to look at it. And, you know, sometimes it's interesting. Sometimes it's little, you know, minor things like, you know, like how like a congressman would refer to himself, or it's like they wouldn't say, you know, they wouldn't put the there. You know, little stuff like that, or how bills are numbered. And you just want that extra level of accuracy to kind of create the world. So it's kind of great. But they're not in the room with us, but they're there. And, you know, they're the kind of people where, hey, we're doing something about the Secret Service. And they're like, I don't know anything, but I will have a Secret Service person that can talk to you by the end of the day. You know, and it's that kind of stuff, which is just fantastic.
Barbara, how about you?
Oh yeah, we have we meet with all kinds of people. In the beginning, certainly we had a media group that consulting group. These were people, a lot of whom had formerly been in the White House. In the beginning, it was very important for us to work directly with people who had formerly had positions in various places, because I don't know if you remember, but in the beginning, we got accused a lot of Hillary boosterism. And so it was really important for us not to be working directly with the State Department and things like that, so it looks like we were shilling for anybody, because we weren't. We were just doing a story about a female Secretary of State. And, you know, and so we, you know, we work very closely with those people. And what we tend to do is we find a scenario we want to do, we pitch it to them. They would say, no, it wouldn't be this country, it would be that country. It wouldn't, you know, the policy isn't this, it's that. And so they help us sort of game things out and put it in the right place in the world and all that. And then later on, we did sort of meet with people who are, you know, all kinds of people are very drawn to the show and interested in the show. And of course, we had former Secretary Madeleine Albright on the show. She consulted with us some in the beginning. And so we've had a lot of great people to talk to.
You guys had actual people on staff, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, given the fact that Aaron wrote all the episodes, the writers' room were the consultants. I mean, there was really wonderful writers also, but for the most part, they were totally on staff. I mean, whether it was Lawrence O'Donnell or Pat Cadell or Dee Dee Myers, and part of that was just get them talking about an issue. Let's hear the language of them, sort of. And Pat, who was becoming somehow far to the right, and he had drank something, it was but it was great for us in the room. And then there was Marlon Fitzwater. I mean, there was a whole slew of people, but. There was also writers who would get recommended to the show, who, for instance, I remember after Bush was elected, I was in Aaron's office, and Aaron gets a call from Al Gore. And he ends up hanging up the phone. He said he just recommended a writer, and the difference right now is George Bush is taking us to war, and Al Gore is recommending writers for the staff of the West Wing. We made a mistake somewhere really bad. It was Eli Addy, who was wonderful.
Oh, that's how Eli? Oh, that's
how
cool.
Eli got there. You know, I mean, I just keep thinking that, like, I feel like the central aspirational tone of the show was very important to you and to Aaron. The idea that politics is the way you create your moral vision, and the importance of public service. But Aaron was not somebody trying to like feed civic vegetables. I mean, he's you know, in the most wonderful way, deeply insecure, impatient, you know,
This is being recorded. I just
storyteller. No, I mean in the best way.
Let me finish.
Yeah, let me finish. But if there was something that was going to express an issue that would express his particular political point of view versus like a great way into a story, he would follow the story.
Sure.
So you've talked a little bit about process, about characters, about aspiration versus sort of climbing a ladder. Michelle, your clip talks about current events, which is, we've actually allocated quite a bit of time for our last section on current events because we realized, you know, LA gets criticized a lot of times for being left-leaning, but obviously our audience is this wide swath of folks from every political belief, and I'm curious.
Not us.
But I'm curious how each of you tackle that reality of who we're there to entertain, who's watching our stuff. Do you want to set up your clip?
Yeah, well, I guess unlike most of the other shows, our universe is the real world in that Trump is president in our universe. And it takes place at this left-leaning, minority-owned law firm in Chicago. And this episode was the third one of the first season, and it's shortly after Trump is elected. Excuse me. And they find that one of their longtime clients who owns cell phone towers is suddenly thinking of leaving the firm because they are reliant on the government and need to get cheap land lease deals. So they are now skeptical that the firm can serve their interests. And the firm is trying to figure out how they hold on to that client.
Wow. We have 80 lawyers and 50 staff, and not a single one voted for Trump?
Or not a single one wanted to admit it.
Maybe I'll just lie and say I voted for him.
Barbara, you got a moment?
What's on your mind?
There won't be any repercussions, right?
Seriously?
Oh my God.
Wait, you voted for Trump? Good. Then you will pitch for us.
Oh, I hate this.
I know, but it's for the firm.
Look, I don't get ostracized, right? I don't get isolated.
Look, Kanye voted for Trump.
No, he didn't. He said he would have if he did vote.
Right. Well, no one's gonna know but Adrian and myself.
Really? Did he say why?
Conservative politics.
Well, Kanye voted for Trump.
No, he didn't, but he would have if he had voted.
Well, we have our spokesperson.
Listen, I promised him he would not be ostracized here.
Of course not.
So to what extent does what's happening in the news dictate what ends up on your show?
A lot more than we would have initially thought.
Yeah.
I mean, we walked into this thinking we were doing a very even-handed law show. And for a lot of years we were. And we were very proud that Michael Moore and Rush Limbaugh were both fans. And then things got insane. And it was tough to be even-handed. But we do have the Julius Cain character that Michael Boatman plays. And we try not to patronize because, first of all, we love the character and we're trying to be honorable.
You talked about Madam Secretary and the Iran deal. What other issues do you sort of pick from the headlines or vice versa?
We do a lot of things. I mean, one of the things that we did, was probably the most controversial thing we did because we try to stay away from hot button issues and we really do want everyone to come to the party, but we decided that our character would commit to the fact that climate change is real. And we sort of decided to go with 99% scientific certainty there. And so, but the way we came to it was through, then this is true, reports that come from the Defense Department about climate change, because they have to deal with the reality of climate change, which is that with rising sea levels, they have to prepare to rebuild bases around the world. And so the Defense Department, which is not exactly the bastion of liberal thought, releases these reports about climate change, and we come at it through that door to say this is broaden the perspective about how we talk about climate change in the world. And so that's one way that we sort of pick up on current events.
David, how about you? Do you get to be broader? Like, are there more things that you talked about the pet issues a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely can be broad. I guess the hardest issue for us is, like, I guess the hardest thing is sort of the delay. I mean, everyone deals with the delay, but for us in particular with comedy, I think, and feel free to you guys yell at me, which is, if you guys did something off of something Trump did, you can be saying you're doing your dramatic interpretation of it. In comedy, it just feels like an old joke. It feels like we're 7 months too late when you're trying to make a joke about it. Because whatever he does, and I'm just picking him right now, like by the time we get to it, or by the time it airs, it just seems like every late night show, every comic has just done 4,000 takes on it. So for us, we try and really sort of look at what's going on and then sort of ask ourselves, like, what's this really about? So, for example, and the great thing is there's something every hour, but, the parade stuff, we would never do, and obviously she's not president right now, but we certainly would never try and go, what if Selena wanted a parade? We just, for all the obvious reasons that when it airs, whatever in, late 2018, early 2000, whatever it does air, like, that'll just seem like the oldest. I mean, you might not even remember it, but it'll definitely seem old and stale. And there's not a lot we can do about it. What is interesting to us is, what does this sort of say about and this is something that has been starting to be written a lot about, obviously, not just his leanings towards sort of an authoritarian regime, but the fact that so many Americans are oddly responding to his leanings. That there is as much as we talk about ourselves as a democracy, that there is this weird sort of authoritarian leaning, especially among people that I think feel the world is changing too much. And that sort of, thing where we ask ourselves, well, how did like Hitler happen? Well, again, it was people looking around going, this is changing too much. We want somebody that's stable, that's a leader. And this is going on in America right now. So not to get too serious, but so then the question is, okay, can we do something about our take on authoritarianism that when you see it, maybe you'll think about the parade, but it will be our thing, and it won't feel a year old. So that's kind of a very serious answer of what we look for in comedy, I guess.
Interesting, yeah.
I would say, and I think about you guys, especially Michelle and Barbara, about dealing with the world as it exists right now, because that was, for us, we were 3 years totally fine doing the show. And on September 10th, we were doing an episode about a lockdown. That was actually the episode we were doing. It was a fake lockdown, and but it was a lockdown. And then September 11th happened. And then our show never was the same. Never was the same. We had to figure out a way to, how do you have Democrats and Republicans bickering at one another again, and sort of worry about whether Josh and Donna are going to get together. And, when we were all
snapping wise.
Yeah, when we were all so sort of, it's hard to remember now of what that feeling was. And I keep thinking, I never felt it with Obama. I thought, oh, House of Cards isn't going to have a problem. And I think about this guy right now and how volatile the world is, exactly for the reasons you were just saying, David. And if something, God forbid, really big happens, and you're 5 months back from when you shot this, it will feel quaint and it's a real balancing act, because I know for us it was, and that's what we did, a special episode. Aaron had to write a special episode.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
How that came about and what that was like?
Yeah, so September 11th happened. We obviously shut down, and on the 12th we were still shut down, and we all sort of sat and we sort of thought, look, nobody's putting a pressure on us to continue. The networks were like, we don't know, we're not going to start the season when we thought we were going to start the season. Don't worry about that. Let's figure out how to deal with this. And it was really Aaron, and I will be really transparent. I was against it. I was very much against it. I thought, is this really the time we want to preach? And we want to but I realized very quickly that he was incapable of continuing to write the show unless he wrote this. And so whether it was right or wrong, it didn't really matter. For us to continue to move on this show, he needed to figure out a way, which was a play. It was like the intro of that, it's all of our characters saying, we're not tonight, this is out of the order, this is a play, we're doing this, and then next week we will get back to what we were doing. Because we had already shot 5 episodes of the season. We were on the 6th episode when this happened.
I thought that was a really interesting moment, because I think I remember talking with you in the trailer, and part of the issue was that Aaron never wrote ahead. I think it's charitable to say. He and I think everybody thought, oh God, let's not break the fourth wall. We're fake. And we didn't want all the sort of dangerous luggage that goes along with saying that we're not fake. I do think in retrospect, and I agreed with you, I was an actor, so I just had to do it. No, but in retrospect, I was actually kind of glad that he was a guy going through this. He couldn't think about anything else. And I thought, that's a lot better than just I think in a lot of different shows, they were, digitally erasing the Twin Towers. Like there was a popular cultural thing of like, let's not deal with this thing. And
Also,
ultimately it was
what all of us know, you're still with this enormous family that is making your show with you. And for us, who were all lost our sea legs, to sort of put all of our efforts to, that's what we're doing now. We're doing this show. And once we made that commitment, we're doing this show. And we shot it, from the time he started writing it to the time it was on the air, I think was 11 days. It was like something, we shot it, we were cutting it the morning of still that it was going to air.
I was shooting that day at like 3 o'clock. It was they were like, if this doesn't go out in 2 minutes, it's not going to get out.
So that part of us just brought us together in a time where that was sort of the essence of what we were trying to do with the show in some ways.
In each of your writers' rooms, is there a diversity of political thought among the writers? And if not, how do you get that when you're tackling complex characters?
Some seasons more than others. Excuse me. Perhaps not as much as one would hope. We read a lot from a lot of different sides of the press and try to gather as many opinions as we can. We reach out to conservative think tanks as well as liberal think tanks, that kind of thing.
We have a little bit of a range of political thought, but really what we have are really strong voices in the room for considering all points of view and trying to present the smartest opposing point of view. We have a lot of people who are extremely vigilant about that. And also, we discuss not just what issues to take on, and I think the discussion, the argument about is what the best solutions for them are. Because even if you sort of agree, have similar political positions, how to resolve things, people can square off about that in different ways. So, but I would say that the strongest aspect of our staff in that way is that they're great advocates for representing all points of view as smartly as we can.
It's probably a pretty Democratic crew in our room. It's probably like a good thing to exist. Like it'd be like a Shabbat Goy, like a Republican that could just go from writer's room to writer's room. I guess that's sort of like Gerald McRaney as an actor, like always at the Republican conventions or something. Isn't he like him and Bruce Willis or something? But for us, again, because we don't do we don't do the parties or even like the issues, we just so mix and match that like in any given episode, she can be pro-gun control. So we kind of go fast and loose there. So it doesn't really necessarily play out as politics. We sort of just have fun with it, which is what's more horrible for her? Well, what if she sort of is pro-gun control just because whatever state she's in. You know what I mean? So it's a lot more for her personal ambition as opposed to an actual issue. So.
Okay. You guys had Eli on staff. You talked about all the folks who'd come in and out of the room. Was there? Did you have them out?
The show was left-leaning. You had to get down to best boy to try to find possibly.
I was going to say the crew. When Trump won, we did
Ron
start
Silver
to see some like MAGA hats and stuff. Yeah, some of the crew. So when he won,
you'll find a great diversity in the crew.
Sure.
Political diversity, but not so much in the writers' room or even the actors, or it was a pretty.
I don't know what this has to do with, but one thing I always thought that was interesting about
your resume.
Yeah. The thing about my work. No. Can
I pitch you another idea?
I think what's interesting about all these shows is that the political world. These are all. They're backstage comedies. The political world is presented to us in very predictable ways. And the joy in all of these is this backstage comedy, whether we're doing it in a funny way or we're doing it in a serious way. You never see politicians struggle. Well, how are we going to come at this issue? How are we going to do it? All you see is the sort of this kind of pretentious civic professional wrestling of presentation of talking points. I just think that it's like a backstage comedy. All of it.
I laugh because when I watch all the shows, we're all doing variations and a lot of times of the same shots. Like we've done the shot of like the speech is out there and everyone's going to exit.
Yeah.
It's like, and we've done the one of people coming in the room, and we've done the secret meeting that the president isn't a part of. So it's all the same shots. It's just different content.
I mentioned we did ours in 1999.
On this topic of reflecting the world and current events, I'm really curious about network notes. And I'm going to tell you a very quick story. There was a show that I sold the pilot of. It never got made to a network. Had a fantastic time doing it. It was my first time actually doing that. And it was about young staffers at the UN. And I had written a scene in which there was a staffer, an African staffer at the gym at the UN wearing a shirt that says, "I was all up in Djibouti." And the network notes came back and said, "We love that. You just have to change the country. But you can keep the joke." And I was like, well, no, that doesn't, the joke is that it's the country of Djibouti. Like, we know that. I'm like, okay, but so then what are you saying? You want any joke there? Like, no, keep a funny joke about a country, just nobody knows where Djibouti is. I was like, okay, what if I put like a crayon with like a map and it went ding, and then you saw that that's where Djibouti was? They're like, no, just change the name of the country. This is probably one of the reasons why it didn't end up getting made. But I'm curious. I know some notes. You know, that push and pull is sometimes funny, sometimes ludicrous, sometimes helpful. How have the networks worked with you, and has there been a push and pull based on what you've wanted to do?
Well, they've been remarkably lenient. There is now software, and this is true, that can fake people's voices. So if you have, I think it's 40 minutes of anyone's recorded voice, you can then use the software and create them saying anything you want. So that becomes a plot point in our show, and we illustrate it by having fake President Trump soliciting phone sex with one of the characters. And then fake Mike Pence wants in on the threesome. And we did go around about that issue.
Sounds like you won.
Yeah, eventually.
I think for us, it's not, I mean, it just sometimes we get because we deal with a lot of other countries and world leaders and stuff, if we get a little too close to something that we're saying happens there that it hasn't been proven it happens there, or, you know, it's not a matter of public record, we can get in trouble, and we find ways around that. But it's really, you know, we're talking about real world leaders in real countries, although they're all fictionalized in our world. That's what we get the most notes about.
But you do choose real countries? You've never made up countries?
We have real countries. We just have made up world leaders of those countries.
We have made up countries also.
Oh, we haven't done that yet.
I was
No.
curious about that.
And HBO's like, we need more blowjobs.
HBO, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It's the only place I've ever worked that has never given a joke note. I mean, it is a creative paradise that I can only, and
That deserves
and also,
an
by the way, yeah, and by the way, and then, you know, also, it also comes from the top of our show, which is Julia is fearless. So when I go to her and say, like, last year we did an episode where she was prepared to give a speech in front of like an Arab League in a harsh condemnation of female ritual genital mutilation, and to get a deal done, she has to soft pedal and actually not necessarily endorse it, but certainly not condemn it, as only Julia can, as Selena. And I don't know, no one, I mean, you know, as far as no one, you know, we did it. I don't know what else to say, but that's when Julia just goes, oh, that sounds great, I can't wait. I mean, and it's like, and she's going, I think we can hit it harder. You know, it's like, so that combination is just magical, yeah.
I knew that, wasn't there, Aaron told me that there was like a crazy note about our pilot that, like the sea story was, we're watching the Haitians. On the boat?
No, that was in the script, that we should maybe go out and see the Haitians on the boat. I was like, that wasn't going to happen.
He told me that they told him that, like, Josh and Sam should get in the water.
But that's
like Rahm Emanuel in a Speedo.
But that was in the writing, the first draft of it. They were actually, I have to say, and it's the best thing of success. The best thing of success is you just don't get that phone call. It's just there, okay, it's working, so we better not fuck it up too much, and they sort of stay away. And I have to say, even the pilot, which we sort of came out of at the Christian Right, and that was a big no-no and everything. And that show got very little hate mail. The biggest thing that ever happened on the show that we got enormous amount, which gives you a context of the time, but maybe not so right now, which was Dule Hill and Elizabeth Moss had a kiss, really passionate kiss. It was a black guy and a white girl and the president's daughter. And that, we got hate mail, we got things with different colored pencils, and really, really aggressive stuff for that. And it was a huge surprise to us, which then actually is sort of why the white supremacists at the end of the assassination were really not trying to shoot the president. They were trying to shoot Dule, that they wanted to stop that. And it really came from the letters that we were getting.
Do you all feel that, so for things like that, or you reminded me of this earlier with the climate change Department of Defense angle, are there things related to topics, LGBT issues, diversity, gender, any specific sort of issue group that we sort of view as, 98, 99% of scientists understand that global warming is a fact, all of that. Is there ever, particularly in the current political climate, a desire to pull back away from that because of what's happening on the news every night? Or is it the opposite? Or are they totally unrelated from writers coming up with storylines?
We don't pull back from anything, really. Because we're a show about foreign policy, we really don't have to deal with some of the most hot-button issues, because domestic policy issues tend to be the most hot-button. And so we're in a position where we can just present foreign policy problems as they occur. Most positions about foreign policy are established after the fact. We shouldn't have done that. We never should have gone in there. But when there's a crisis that needs to be resolved, it's pretty nonpartisan in the moment. And so we're able to take on anything we want in terms of foreign policy crises all over the world. And again, because we were anyway a little bit futurized, it's not as immediate. And we have, two characters on our show who are bisexual, actually, which we established last year, and then again we added a character, and who's bisexual queer, and she has a very pronounced look, and that was, embraced by the network, and she's just part of our staff now. And so we just sort of, issues like that, we just sort of work them into the landscape. It's really important for us for our world to look like the world. And so we sort of are able to take on those issues that way.
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't steer away from issues because they're too controversial. We steer away because they might be too earnest, and that's the last thing we want to be. We spend a lot of time satirizing the left as much as anything else, because really otherwise it would be insufferable.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for us, no sacred cows at all, and it is very enjoyable. We get to kind of take the left on a little bit as well, and that's certainly really fun. No real pushback, I will say. Occasionally certain groups are louder than others, will do it. To me, and I sort of say this, what can I tell you? I guess this is the easy way I can express it myself, and you don't have to agree, which is, I'm a Jewish person who has family that was lost in the Holocaust, but give me a good Holocaust joke any day of the week. I'm the first to laugh. So I'm an equal opportunity offender. So if you watch the show, we are targeting all over the place. So when there is some reference to something and somebody gets particularly upset, I understand it, but I guess I don't want to live in a world where you can't make that joke. It is what it is.
That's offensive.
You're probably right.
My last question for all of you, and they've asked me to answer it first. So it's a two-parter. Why are people so fascinated with this world of politics on screen? And then what do you hope audiences take away most from your show? And I thought of something that happened a few years ago, right after Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay came out. This was during the Bush years, and I was in DC for something and bumped into a couple of President Bush's senior staffers. And they said, "Oh, wow, you're from that Harold and Kumar Guantanamo movie." And I said, "Yeah." And they go, "That's hilarious. That movie is so funny. We all love it." I was like, even the scene where we're smoking weed with the fake President Bush, you guys were into that? And they said, "Yeah, why? Was it supposed to be a knock on President Bush?" I'm like, "No, not at all. It's a satire. We thought and we wanted these two left-leaning characters to smoke weed with a conservative president." I said, "Yeah, that's what we thought. It's hilarious." I'm like, "Great. That's a good feeling. That means that we've entertained you even with this satire about Guantanamo and all of that." So I always think about that when I'm asked, what do I hope audiences take away? Is aside from some sort of the subversive stuff that we put in there on purpose, as a comedian, I just love that you laugh. But you guys are actually show creators and showrunners, and is there a deeper answer to that for each of your shows or your body of work overall?
I'm not a showrunner. No, I think you can be a defense attorney and really like Law and Order. People are getting grabbed, by the storytelling. I know a lot of conservative people, who the politics of Bartlett's administration did not dissuade them or not allow them, to sort of, to connect with it. I mean, people's storytelling gets people at a non-intellectual place, at a sort of reptilian brainstem place, and if that's working in whatever sort of milieu we're working in, people will will connect to the story.
I think I have to answer that question thinking back a little bit, because truly, looking through the lens of the world that we live in right now, and what I would want a show to say would not necessarily be the lens that I was looking in 1999 when I did this show. But that lens was what we talked about, the aspirational element, a sort of Valentine's to public service, and probably the greatest compliment that I think any of us who worked on the show, I would say, is when you meet somebody who's working in politics, who's really committed and there, and said, "I was growing up and I saw the West Wing, and it looked like a profession I would want to go into at a moment in time when people were running from the profession." They were sort of, it's a little bit like, when ER came on, there was more young people deciding, maybe I should become a doctor, that sort of, and so that part of the aspirational element and part of you actually can affect change, and people committed their lives to that, is an incredibly rewarding part of the show.
That is very cool.
Yeah, I have to say, I have gotten some emails, quite a few, from people who tell me that their daughters who are entering college have decided to study political science, international relations, because of the show. And that is a great thing to read, especially the next generation feeling inspired to go into that, young women. So it's great.
With our show, I feel like if people are taking something away from the issues, we've probably screwed up. Because really, it's all about the characters, and if they're not just invested in the characters and curious to see what Diane Lockhart is wearing that week, then they're probably not following the show we're writing.
David.
I guess I'll say two things, which is, number one is, and I guess no matter which side you're on, there was a lot of, in the run-up to last year when we were, I guess, coming back in the spring, but he had won, you definitely had a lot of people that, and it was the first time I'd ever heard this, which was just people just kind of going like, we're looking for something to laugh at. Like, we want to be able to laugh in general, but also we want to sort of laugh about politics again, and in some ways, like, and again, it wasn't so much like we want you to make Trump jokes, it was just like we want to sort of laugh about the pomposity. We want to laugh about versions of things he's doing. And so that was something that was really interesting to me, just conceptually. I hadn't thought about it like that. That just, you know, even the people that kind of voted for him were happy to laugh a little bit, and that was kind of nice. So that was really interesting. We don't get a lot of letters about people looking to go into public service. I get a lot of letters people looking to go into comedy writing, but you know, but that sense that somehow people were waiting for the show, I guess, so that they could, I don't know, it sounds silly, but laugh a bit was nice.
This is awesome. This was very selfishly, I don't know how you feel about this. I'm not in a room or a stage with show creators and showrunners very often. So this was super interesting to me. I'm also a huge political nerd. So just big round of applause to Barbara, Michelle, David, Tommy, and Bradley. Thanks to the Academy for hosting us. Thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. And keep watching their stuff. I have the box set I'm going to start watching again. So thank you guys very much.